If we could focus for a bit on the Ukraine crisis, it affects all parts of the world and us included. Specifically, what sort of role do you see Turkey playing in that crisis? Is it a bridge, between NATO and Russia, or is it taking sides? What's your take?
Well, I don't think it's going to be much of a bridge because Putin doesn't want it to be. Turkey, as you know, Erdogan has offered to be a mediator. The Ukrainians said fine, and Putin, didn't say, he has functionally said no. And it does seem the Russians are unhappy with the Turks because the Turks have been supplying the TB2 drones to Ukraine for some time. They were actually used last fall, at least one was, in combat in the Donbass. And beyond that, Turkey and Ukraine have signed a number of military agreements, mainly co-production agreements, including regarding the armed drones, as well as the next stage, Turkey's, the Akinci, I believe it's called, drone. And none of that sits too well, I wouldn't think, with Russia. They've publicly rebuked Turkey about it. On the contrary, though, it has, I believe, helped Turkey's stock in the United States, in Washington, where, although not much is said about it publicly, and to my knowledge, Turkey's arms dealings with Ukraine are not coordinated with NATO. My impression is that it sits very well with Washington.
So
that doesn't, regarding the bridge issue, obviously within NATO, perhaps Germany accepted, Erdogan probably has the best relationship with Putin, but and the longest standing, I suppose, of all NATO leaders, but I don't really see Turkey playing that role right now.
Okay.
You disagree? By the way, is this a three-way discussion, or are you?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I'm just curious if you disagree. You see it differently from where you sit?
I don't know enough about it. I don't know enough. But obviously, if there's a fight between Russia and Ukraine and other parties, they get some more importance. Also, they may pay a high price afterwards.
Yeah.
Now, for Israel, one of our big difficulties is that most of our wheat import and a lot of our steel import comes from the Ukraine. And if there's a war, the prices are going to go up wildly, and it can disrupt the stability of our government. So there are ripple effects that nobody is actually speaking too much about it. And I must say, I hope very much that everybody hopes it won't go into a military situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there are, it seems to me superficially, well, maybe not just superficially, but I defer to you, Dr. Hirschfeld, on anything regarding Israel, of course, but the situations of Turkey and Israel are somewhat analogous here. Both are pro-Western, well, at least have important relationships with the West. Israel, I think, is decidedly pro-Western, and Turkey, I guess we could argue about, but it belongs to the premier Western military association, NATO, and which puts it on the Ukrainian side. And of course, Turkey has very and rapidly developing relations with Ukraine. But both Israel and Turkey also have important stakes with Russia these days. And so it is kind of an analogous, both Israel and Turkey, it seems to me, have to walk a tightrope and keep their fingers crossed that there are no hostilities.
Ukrainian embassy has accused us of not taking too strong a pro-Ukrainian position. But I personally believe that the United States is going far too far, and if they succeed without a war, it's fine. But you know, you have coercive diplomacy. There are five components to a successful coercive diplomacy, and Biden is doing 4 very well, but he's dropped the 5th totally, and that I believe is very dangerous. The first is you have a clear demand, which is not to attack. The second is you have to build a strong coalition around it, which he's doing. The third, you have to have strong sanctions in order to make clear that you want to do it. The fourth is if you don't get what you want, you must be clear that you're going to use power. And this is all doing. This is doing perfectly. And I'm afraid he's doing it mainly for internal reasons, not only for external reasons. And the 5th one is if you want to be successful, you give the other side a way out, more than a face-saving award. You let him win something out of it, and you give him a way out of it. Truman did this brilliantly in 1946 with Iran and the Soviet Union. And Biden doesn't seem to know that there's a 5th component to it. And I must say, I'm highly irritated about it. I hope I'm wrong.
Well, I think and this is just strictly from public information, but I think the administration feels they have given Russia somewhat of an off-ramp. Putin purports that they haven't, that it's not enough, but they've made clear they're open to security discussions regarding Europe, and probably, I presume, something along the lines of what, you know, CFE was so long ago, you know, where you would, with limitations on personnel and weaponry in certain places, but where I think he does not want to back off is on the principle that Ukraine someday could join NATO, and that he has no give, although he has said that there's no near-term possibility of that happening. I did wonder about your 4th point, though, on use of force. I mean, Biden has made clear that we will not go to war over Ukraine or send any troops to Ukraine. And how is it that you see that we're using use of force, the threat of use of force? We've reinforced Eastern Europe, but
the sanctions are going to get speaking of very strong sanctions, and it's obviously encouraging Ukraine to defend themselves very effectively. Maybe the force is not there as much as I would like it to be on the Iranian side. But you know, yeah, it's true. He's obviously saying no. But
yeah. I think regarding, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to.
No, I believe, you know, I'll give you a personal background. I
Please.
came, when I was 5 years old, I came to Vienna from New Zealand because my parents left for 1,000 years and they came back. And I grew up with a very schizophrenic approach towards the Russians. There were Russian soldiers in Vienna, And I was one of the few kids who wasn't afraid of them because I saw them as liberators of Hitler, of Nazi Germany and of that. And I thought them friendly or not. In my home, there were people who had been former communists, but they had been put in prison by Stalin and they had suffered. And I got all the crimes of the Soviets from 6 and 7 years on. I had the double picture. But the picture in the United States is painting is very well. It's one level. It's not a double level. It hasn't got the two levels of it. And you know, if you look at Soviet security, it's like an onion peel. So they took out Hungary and Czechia and Slovakia, and now they took out Bulgaria and Romania, and now they're taking out this and that, and it's getting into the heart of Russian existence. And I learned. I have one guy. If you ever say a critical word about him, I'll be very angry. The guy's called Sir Winston Spencer Churchill.
Okay.
And Winston Churchill said, you know, in defeat be resilient, but in victory be magnanimous.
Magnanimous. Yeah.
Magnanimous. And there was no magnanimity. There was no magnanimity. You pushed him and pushed him and pushed him. And from my point of view, I think this is a very, very dangerous policy. But unfortunately, I've got nothing to say.
Yeah, look, I think there's a recognition that Ukraine is naturally a security concern for Russia, but you know, it kind of meets. It's this classic conflict between you know, hard interests and ideals. I think it's very hard in the United States to simply write off a country to an authoritarian regime. I'm not saying we've never done it. Of course, the times we have felt we've had to do it, but to simply walk away from the issue is really to consign Ukraine to a very different kind of existence than it has now. And I think it's very hard, you know, it would be very hard for any American administration to do that. Now, there might be some formula. I've thought about, what if Henry Kissinger were the king right now, a king of the United States? You know, balance of power. Yeah, I think Kissinger would probably be willing to make some kind of deal where it would be understood that Ukraine would never go into NATO.
Can be EU. They can be EU. They can have all the economic benefits. And there can be other security structures.
Sure. The problem is, though, and look, I don't want to purport to be a Russia expert, but I'm not. So I can't purport to be one. But, you know, we all follow Russia very closely all our lives, right? I mean, you have to. And, you know, my sense is that what you're suggesting would not be very acceptable to Putin because he doesn't want to see a democratic Ukraine. I mean, it's partly a security issue, but it's partly the disease of democracy that he wants to prevent from spreading. And so, you know, that's why he is so focused on, you know, talks so vituperatively about, you know, the color revolutions. And I think there's more involved than security for Putin here. I think that's the problem. Otherwise, what you're suggesting would be perhaps something that would be workable. I do believe, though, there is some kind of smart diplomats should be able to come up with something, given the fact that Ukraine is really not going to go into NATO. I mean, for the foreseeable future. It's really not ready to. And even if it were ready, I don't think, a decision to take it in would have to be unanimous. I don't think there's any prospect of Ukraine actually getting into NATO for years and years to come. Certainly not in the world that exists now. So I think there is room for diplomats to come up with creative solutions there.
Alan, does the Biden administration need to show additional toughness, especially after Afghanistan? Is that a perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think that is. I know Yair. May I call you Yair, by the way?
No, please call me Yair.
Yeah, I'm far more familiar with you than you are with me, of course, when in 1993, when you burst into the international headlines, I was working for Dennis Ross, the special Middle East coordinator at the State Department. So, and actually I was on the White House lawn on September 13th, 1993 for the famous Oslo ceremony. So, I've read a lot about you over the years, so it's really exciting for me to meet you. Once Afghanistan happened, I think it was clear to the administration and to the world that many adversaries of the US would be testing us because we came across looking very weak. And I think the administration knows that. And I think they have tried to hold the line as much as they possibly can on Ukraine. And that might be one of the reasons, Yair, that they haven't wanted to compromise on this issue of Ukraine's right to join NATO ultimately. I think they knew they were going to be tested and they're trying. It's important domestically, but I think it's even more important in terms of international affairs. I suspect, one of the questions people have asked, and I won't attempt to answer is, well, I guess I will a bit. Why is Putin doing this now? Why did he create this crisis now? I don't know if I could answer it to the day, but I think Putin was encouraged by Afghanistan to think that we have a weak government in Washington and that now was the time to push the US back. And if for no other reason, the US really can't be too compromising on fundamental issues. Because of that, they've got to reestablish their bona fides internationally. So I think that's even more important than domestically, but the domestic component is important too, because Afghanistan, you look at Biden's approval ratings, which are down around 40%. Trump's were about the same, but virtually every other president since Eisenhower was doing much better at this stage in their administration. His approval ratings really first tanked after Afghanistan. First one deteriorated after Afghanistan, and they've never really recovered. So yeah, I think it does have a domestic component too. Chris, how is it seen in Cyprus, by the way?
Yeah. Well, I was going to follow up with a question having to do with the Biden administration's changes in its attitude towards some of the developments in the Eastern Mediterranean. But Yair had a question though on
oh yeah, okay, sure.
No, I do something which was wrong to do, but for conceptual. If you look at Truman, when taking over between March, April, and April 45 and February 46, he gave in. And in all the relations they had with the Soviet Union, Stalin took him and after giving more and more in February, Mr. Stalin comes out with a speech saying, you know, it's the fight of capitalism against decency and socialism, or whatever he said. And it's clear that the more you give in, it is. And then he puts his foot down. He puts his foot down, and he's successful in putting his foot down. But he, after he's get the obligation from the Soviets, they're going to move out of Iran. They can negotiate the withdrawal with the Iranians. And they negotiated. That was a face-saving advice, a brilliant face-saving advice. And it could be the same, theoretically, the same face-saving advice is on hand. You know, there is an obligation to get out and not to do in. But negotiate with the Iranians that you can do it. What happened with Iran was that they negotiated. They gave the Soviets 3 big concessions. And in the next 1.5 years, they took the 3 concessions back and the Russians were without anything. The Ukrainians, for theoretically having now the real American protection de facto, could do something very similar. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is totally fantasy.
Well, let me ask you, what would you do then? I mean, what is the analog to the 1946 Iran issue? I mean, certainly Ukraine and Russia could negotiate, but well, they have. I mean, there is a process with France and Germany. I think you were suggesting, though, as I understood it, that the US should say something that kind of makes clear that Ukraine will never go into NATO. Correct? Isn't that what you were? That's what I inferred.
I'm saying basically, we, the United States, are giving the security protection to Ukraine. Whatever form, directly, indirectly, we will not allow Russia to go into Ukraine, and we want to know this from the Soviets. But in return, they can have arrangements between them that are possible, and the Ukrainians can live up to it with some things and some not. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I don't think creative diplomacy like that has been excluded, but where I think they have drawn a line in the sand is on this issue of principle, that Ukraine has the right to aspire to join NATO, that it won't be ruled out. And I think within that context, there is room for some kind of resolution. I actually think, by the way, I mean, I'm not trying to just pump the shill for the Biden administration, but I think they've also done a very good job holding the alliance together, better than anyone expected. Yes, I think Putin's in a corner. I think, look, it's true, he could still go in, but it would be at an enormous cost. And I suspect he's looking for a way out, and you're right. There has to be some kind of off-ramp. But I think the administration has hinted at it already. I really do. I think but we'll see. Time will tell. Yeah.
Sorry, Chris, I'm being too dominant.
Yeah. Alan, coming back to the question you posed to me, what the thinking here is, it's actually one of puzzlement to a certain degree, whether and to what extent the Biden administration will change certain certain directions that the previous administration had taken regarding the cooperation between Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, and the general direction that all of that was taken. Obviously, the reversal on the pipeline is important, which begs the question: if the East Med pipeline was going to go through Turkey, would the U.S. react differently, because it raised certain green issues and certain other issues and so on. But the main question, I think, is what would the U.S. do, and has it prepared itself for the crisis that is bound to come between Greece and Turkey in the Aegean? It seems that all things are indicating that it's a matter of time before this thing heats up again. Now, there were certain changes and certain moves by the U.S. in terms of security arrangements in Greece, et cetera, et cetera. But are those brought into question with Biden? I mean, were those the previous administration's positions, or are they, across time?
Yeah, I think regarding this last point, this administration, which finished up the MDCA with the Mutual Defense Cooperation Agreement with Greece, and of course the process started in the previous administration, but I think some fairly dramatic developments have happened in U.S.-Greek bilateral relations, and particularly regarding Alexandroupolis, the presence of the U.S. there and the commitment to developing Alexandroupolis, which I believe is about 12 miles from the Turkish border. So I think it shows, first of all, it's a message to Turkey that there was going to be a price to pay in Greek-Turkish relations for their drift away from the West. And second of all, I think it's a message to Turkey, that's not a border for them to cross. And so I think the US is aware of it. And, of course, they're aware of the possibility of some kind of explosion between Greece and Turkey. But I don't know if I can point to what they're doing behind the scenes, but I mean, I think they're keenly aware of it. And I think the MDCA with Greece was a very bold stroke.
What about the East Med, the more general equation of cooperation?
Yeah. Look, I don't know. I agree that they may not be quite as enthusiastic about it as the previous administration, particularly Mr. Pompeo was, but they have remained committed. They've restated their commitment, and as I understood it, when Foreign Minister Kasoulides was here in Washington a couple of weeks ago and met with Secretary Blinken, that Blinken said that there will be a 3+1 ministerial at some point. He didn't set the date, but I think the administration is supportive of the 3+1. It would be very difficult not to be. You have 3 democratic countries that have a lot of support in the US Congress, bipartisan support. I think it would be very difficult for an administration not to be supportive. Would they have come up with it on their own? I don't know, but they inherited it, and I think they'll continue to support it. Now, I see the pipeline issue is a little different. Am I talking too long? Should I continue?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
3+1 is Greece, Cyprus, and Israel.
Yes, and the +1 is the United States.
Yeah.
I think the pipeline issue, the US, even though it denies that it did it, because of Turkey, I think it saw it as a easy win with Turkey. The pipeline, very few people believed the pipeline was viable anyway. We were able to put it in the context of environmental issues that, hydrocarbons should be phased out. So there was a nice principle to put it in. But, the reality was, they, at least I think as the administration saw it, that a pipeline, they trade off a pipeline that will never exist anyway, to score a few points with Turkey, and perhaps, and I think they really mean this when they say it, they think that it calms the situation in the Aegean.
Alan, being supportive of something doesn't mean that you're going to work towards having it happen. And I think this is what the question is about concerning the pipeline. Very few people believed that it was economically viable. There's obviously a difference between supporting something and pushing to have it come to fruition. And one thing about the pipeline was that although few people believed that it would have happened in the end, quite many people appreciated the fact that it was an issue that pushed the 3+1 ahead. It was a subject that the three countries agreed upon. They were discussing, creating structures in order to push it ahead. I think in full knowledge that it wasn't a done deal, obviously. So I think this is where the question comes in many people's minds, is, the US is sophisticated diplomatically to understand this and to have understood this and the role that the pipeline played in the whole relationship. And so boycotting it or reversing its position on it inevitably suggests that there's a broader agenda there, that perhaps it's actually pulling the rug out of the 3+1.
Yeah, I don't think so. Look, I think I don't know if this is the administration's view, but it's my view that the pipeline helped to kickstart the 3+1, but 3+1, it seems to me, has its, let's set aside the +1 for now. That the pipeline helped to kickstart the trilateral relationship, but I think the trilateral relationship has its own momentum now. The three countries seem to be genuinely close. They do share common interests. They do share common values. They have a common view of the West, and it's, they have had military exercises. They've done a lot of different things now together. And
many people say that that's not enough. And what was necessary and what is necessary is an underlying, common economic and other motivation that pushes these things along. And in fact, that this is, again, what is seen with worry on both Greek and Cypriot side, is the role that the US is playing in the Israeli-Turkish rapprochement. Because there, there's a real interest and a real material cooperation between, even to the, at this time, between Turkey and Israel, economic and so on. So that, in some ways, is more important than the relationship on an economic and underlying basis between Cyprus and Israel and Greece and Israel. So the two things put together are worrying, I think, the politicians on this side. I mean, the Greek and Cypriot side, in wondering whether this is, the U.S. is really interested in bringing Israel and Turkey back, and that's the key axis to the future of the Eastern Mediterranean, and not what was going before. What's your take?
I don't think there's a grand design here. When Brett McGurk, who is the top Middle East official at the White House, when he was interviewed a couple of weeks ago at Carnegie, he was asked about the administration's vision for the Middle East. And he said, look, we have one goal in the Middle East: prevent Iran from going nuclear. I'm paraphrasing him now. This is what I took from it. Otherwise, we want to see an end to disputes among our friends. And he specifically, no, he didn't say even among our friends. He said, we want to see an end to intra-regional disputes. And he cited two examples, if I heard him correctly. One was Turkey, UAE. Of course, Erdogan was just in Abu Dhabi. And he even cited the Saudi-Iranian talks approvingly. I think they're trying to calm the waters. They want to focus on Iran because they know they have to, and they really want to focus on China. And they don't want to deal with the Middle East that much. So I don't think this is a grand vision story. I think, but do I think the pipeline decision and the Israeli-Turkish rapprochement could be related? There could be a relationship there in timing. So I understood, and look, again, this is not based on inside information, but sort of based on the atmosphere that I take from various conversations. I think the US did encourage the Israeli-Turkish rapprochement, does encourage it, basically because it doesn't want hostilities. And it saw the pipeline as something sticking in the craw of the Turks, and something that they saw as needless because it wasn't real. So that's how I see it. Now, could it develop into something more? I mean, I'm very skeptical. I mean, it seems to me that Lapid, and I'm glad Yair is back on the line.
I'm sorry, my internet is
Shaky. I don't know. So you didn't hear our discussion here so far, correct? No.
I heard the concerns of Chris. I heard the beginning of it.
Yeah. So we were talking about the way that a revived Israeli-Turkish relationship might affect the trilateral relationship between Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. I started to say, I think Lapid in particular has said all the right things, that nothing will interfere with Israel's relationship with Cyprus and Greece. I think, on the one hand, you could say words are cheap, but when I try to look at it from the Israeli point of view, it makes sense to me. Could Israel seriously trust an Erdogan government? And if
the short answer is absolutely no. Absolutely no.
Absolutely no.
Erdogan has betrayed Israel again and again. His base is, in order to support his base, he has to be basically very, very anti-Israeli. He's maintaining it. He is inciting against Israel. He is promoting Hamas terror against Israel. He may stop a little bit here and there, but the entire concept is there. And what this is only half of the picture. The other half of the picture is that we need very strong relations with Egypt. And we are fighting to stabilize the relations between the United States and Egypt. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. And this doesn't work with the Turks. The Turks basically will do everything to undermine Mr. Sisi. So I don't see any chance. I must say, I understand the fears on your side, but obviously you are polite and nice towards the Turks. Then okay, you want to be nice, let's be nice. And but it's a serious thing. Instead of the Israeli Cyprus Greek, it is Israel, it's Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Cyprus, Greece. It doesn't make sense in any way. And I know people who are close to the government who say that Turkey is a bigger enemy than Iran. I don't think this is true. I question, I think this is an overstatement.
It was reported that the Mossad chief said that a few years ago. Although I get in a private conversation, he was said to have said that. But
yeah,
I have to say, from my vantage point, thousands of miles away, I think Iran should be a bigger concern for Israel.
Iran is a bigger concern.
But that doesn't mean Turkey's not a concern.
But Turkey is a very serious concern.
Yeah.
And in the end, the Turkey's capacity to incite against Israel as a Sunni country is very different than Iran as a Shiite country. Also, Iran, they cause a lot of trouble, and 150,000, all the military thing and terror and all of this. But Iran, Turkey's the alliance relationship with Turkey is long gone, and I don't see if Erdogan falls and there comes Kamal Darwish. I don't know if you remember Kamal Darwish.
I do, of course, yeah.
Then but it's not going to happen in Turkey, and the Mediterranean interests, Turkish interest, the Turkish attempt to come to terms with Libya and the EEZ has been an open threat to Israel. It's been it's clearly has threatened Israeli most important vital issues, and the link Egypt. I think I understand where your fears come from, but I think they're from.
I think we're basically in the same place. I would go even a little further on a couple of points. Again, I'd say with humility, talking about Israel and in your presence, Yair, but I would think from an Israeli point of view, even if the secular opposition, CHP, were to come to power, Israel would still have to be very wary, because an Erdogan's type of government could always come back. I think the jury would be out on Turkey for years to come from an Israeli point of view. And anyway, I think Israel has discovered some of the benefits of the relationship with the Hellenics, some of the invaluable aspects, not least among them the relationship, the benefits it brings in the U.S. Congress here. So, yeah, I don't think it's very likely that Israel would throw that overboard for the prospect of, for a nostalgia-based prospect, let's say, of reviving its relationship with Turkey. And what's interesting about the current rapprochement, if we want to call it that, the effort at rapprochement with the apparently upcoming trip of President Herzog, is that unlike in the old days of Israeli-Turkish relations, Israel holds the leverage now. Erdogan needs the relationship. It used to be that Israel was the party that was needy. And now it's the opposite. So look, as you said, Chris, they have a good trade relationship. They still have a free trade agreement. It's never been canceled from, that's a residue of the close relationship of the mid-90s. All Israel, it seems to me, really needs from Turkey is good economic relations, diplomatic calm, and of course, I think the Israelis would like, regarding the issue you raised, Yair, they'd like to see an end to Turkish support for Hamas. So now they have the leverage, and I think, I don't see Israel doing much more here than just exploring what they can use this leverage for. And if they can calm the waters a bit with Turkey, I don't think there's much more than that. Now, I know that regarding pipeline issues, certainly Amos Hochstein, who's the key energy official at the State Department, he was, in the Obama years, he held a similar position. He was a big advocate of the Turkey-Israel pipeline. But he may theoretically still be an advocate of it, I don't know. I don't see how it can happen. I cannot see Israel breaching Cyprus's EEZ to build such a pipeline and put their gas in Erdogan's hands. If they did try to do so, as far as I understand UNCLOS, the law of the sea, Cyprus could tie it up using environmental reasons, could tie it up in international court for years. And the other route Israel could take for such a pipeline would have to be, through the Lebanese and Syrian EEZs. I can't see that. Not with Hezbollah around, not with Assad around. So I see that Turkish-Israel pipeline idea as a total pipe dream. But I know Erdogan has talked about it, and I think it's made some people, particularly in Cyprus, uneasy, but I don't believe it will happen. Do you disagree with any of my logic at all, Chris?
No, not at all. It's just, as I said, there's concern, and
sure, there's
because the Israeli relationship with Cyprus values that, I think, more, in some ways, more than its relationship with Greece. So that's an odd thing to say, but because our future is in the Eastern Med, and the literal countries, especially Israel, is the pivot for a better future in the Eastern Mediterranean. Not so much Greece as Israel and Egypt.
Right. I give you another point.
I think that's the headline statement from this conversation.
Yeah. My sense is, if I read German politics, that also the SPD and also the Green Party tend to be far more anti-Turkish than the CDU, for a variety of reasons. Also on that line, I really can't see. We are now Israel is now in a position. I'm fighting a little bit a private war, but it's not a private war. You have this new German government around the Green Party. They came out with a rights-based policy towards Israel and the region. And in my views, this mean rights-based. In what they're speaking about is save Palestine, punish Israel, and which is stupid and out of place and everything. And I think we're winning this battle. We're winning this battle, but it means that we're speaking about a development, climate resilient and rights-based policy. But rights means of the rights of strengthening the democracies in the area, strengthening soft. This is all Greece, Cyprus. This is Italy. It's all the not. So I don't see your fears to be realistic.
You don't see. I didn't catch.
I don't see Greece's fear, the Cyprus fears to be realistic. I don't.
Yeah. By the way, I didn't want something I said. I didn't want misunderstood. Although, I don't. If Erdogan were to lose power to the secular opposition party, I don't think it would alter Israel's support for its trilateral relationship with Greece and Cyprus. I do think it would be a welcome development from Israel's point of view, because in particular, the secular party, I think, would end the relationship with Hamas most definitively. Let's face it, I mean, the relationship between Turkey and Hamas is quite interesting. I mean, we could talk for a long time about it, its origins and its and why it continues. But the secularists, they may be pro-Palestinian, and they may be just as nationalist as Erdogan on Hellenic related issues, Cyprus and the Aegean. But they won't have anything to do with, let's say, with Islamic extremists. And so I think there would be a diminution and probably an end to involvement with Hamas. Part of the reason that Erdogan supports Hamas, if not the entire reason, is because of his own personal commitments, his own personal and sentimental attachment to the Muslim Brotherhood and to movements like that. So I don't think it's ever been particularly in Turkey's interest to work with Hamas, but I think a lot of it just stems from who Erdogan is and who the core and what the personality and commitments and hopes and dreams of the core of his party is. But it's not so much about hard Turkish interests. So I think from Israel's point of view, there would be a gain were the secularists to come to power. I think from Greece and Cyprus's point of view, it would be less of a gain, but still a slight gain, I would say, because the secularists will be structurally tied to the West in a way that I don't think Erdogan is. So still a lot of issues there. And
Okay.
Yair, you have any more questions?
Not really. No. Oh, it's a pleasure for me to meet you, Ellen. But
yeah, Yair, a real pleasure for me to meet you. Actually, I have a niece who lives in Israel, and all kinds of great nephews and nieces and great-greats. And once this COVID thing is, once we've fully shaken it, I hope to come visit sometime soon. And
we have a lovely
I hope I can look you up when that day comes.
It will be great, yeah.
It's been a real pleasure joining
It
you
is
guys.
indeed.
Thank you so
for
much.
your time, and hopefully we'll be in touch again, and you can be in touch with Yair, and I think.
Thanks, everyone. Yair, looking forward to being in touch. Chris, looking forward to being in touch. Actually, very soon. Okay.